I had already lifted the cup. The steam curled up toward my face, warm and familiar, carrying that soft smell of coffee I had trusted for years. My fingers wrapped around the handle the way they always did, steady, practiced, unthinking. That's when I heard it. "No, Grandma!" The scream tore through the kitchen like glass breaking. I froze. The cup hovered inches from my lips as my grandson came running from the hallway, barefoot, panic all over his small face. His eyes weren't playful, they weren't confused, they were terrified. "Don't drink that," he yelled again, grabbing my wrist with both hands. His fingers were shaking. "Please don't. Mama put something in it." Time didn't stop. It slowed, just enough for everything to change. I looked down at him, then at the coffee, then back at his face. "What did you say, sweetheart?" I asked softly. He swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the front door, as if he expected it to open at any second. "Mama said it helps you sleep," he whispered, "but she only puts it when you're not looking, and she said I shouldn't tell." I set the cup down, carefully, quietly, not a single drop spilled. Just minutes earlier, my son had kissed my cheek on his way out. My daughter-in-law had smiled, that same polite, practiced smile, and handed me the mug like it was a gift. They said they were going out for a bit. Dinner, a movie, normal things. "We'll be back late," she'd said. "Try to rest." Rest. I pulled my grandson into my arms and felt his heart racing against my chest. "You did the right thing," I told him, smoothing his hair. "You always do." "But Mama said—" "I know, and you were very brave." I walked him to the living room, turned on his favorite cartoon, and sat beside him until his shoulders relaxed. When he laughed at something on the screen, I excused myself and went back to the kitchen alone. The coffee was still there, waiting. I poured it down the sink, watched the dark liquid disappear. Then I rinsed the mug, dried it, put it back exactly where it belonged. If anyone asked, I had drunk it. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. My mind replayed every detail I'd brushed aside over the past few months. The way my daughter-in-law had started insisting on making my drinks herself. How she'd gently laugh when I misplaced my glasses. "See, this is why we worry about you." How my son had suggested a checkup, then another, then a specialist. How they always spoke for me in appointments. She forgets things. She gets confused. We just want what's best. I wasn't confused. I was observant. The next morning, I woke up early, earlier than usual. I moved slowly, deliberately, listening to the sounds of the house waking up. My daughter-in-law was already in the kitchen when I arrived. She looked surprised. "You're up early," she said. "So are you," I replied. She smiled and reached for the coffee jar. "Let me make you something warm." "No, I think I'll have tea today." Her hand paused for just a fraction of a second. Then she laughed. "Of course, tea it is." I watched her closely as she filled the kettle, watched where her eyes went, watched what she touched and what she didn't. Nothing went into my cup that morning, and nothing was said. But something had shifted. Later that afternoon, my grandson sat beside me on the porch steps, swinging his legs. "Grandma?" he asked quietly. "Are you mad at Mama?" I looked at the yard, the tree my husband planted decades ago, the wind moving through its branches. "No," I said, truthfully. "I'm just paying attention now." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. That evening, my son mentioned memory clinics over dinner, casually, like he was talking about the weather. "Just to be safe," he said, "for peace of mind." I smiled back at him. "Of course," I said, "peace of mind is important." Later, when the house was quiet again, I took out an old notebook from my dresser drawer, the kind with yellowed pages and a cracked spine. I hadn't written in it in years. I opened to the first blank page and wrote the date. Then I wrote one sentence. Today, my grandson saved my life. I didn't know how far this would go. I didn't know how carefully the trap had been set around me, and I certainly didn't know how it would end. But one thing was clear as I closed the notebook and turned off the light. I was no longer just living in their story. I was about to understand it. And once you understand something, you can change it. Once you notice a pattern, you can't unsee it. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't announce itself. It waits, quietly, patiently, until you finally slow down enough to recognize it. After that morning, I paid attention in a way I hadn't before. Not with fear, with clarity. The coffee only appeared on certain days. The days my son and daughter-in-law were stepping out. The days they didn't want interruptions. The days they wanted me calm, manageable. On mornings when they stayed home, my daughter-in-law suddenly forgot to offer me anything at all. "Oh, did you want something?" she'd say, already halfway out the door with her phone in her hand. I began keeping track, not in my notebook yet, just in my head. Years of living had taught me how to remember quietly. When you raise children, you learn observation is survival. The comments started coming more often. "You already asked that, remember? I think you're mixing things up again. Mom, maybe you didn't hear it right." Always gentle, always smiling, always in front of others, but never when we were alone. At night, I lay awake listening to the rhythm of the house. My grandson slept soundly in the room next to mine, his door always slightly open. That small detail, left open on purpose, became my anchor. He was my proof. One afternoon, I walked him home from school. His backpack bounced against his small shoulders as he talked non-stop about a science project. We passed Mrs. Calder's house, the retired nurse who lived 3 doors down. She was kneeling in her garden, gloves on, hair pulled back under a faded cap. She waved. I waved back. On impulse, I stopped. "Mrs. Calder," I said, "can I ask you something?" She straightened slowly. "Of course, Ruth." I hesitated, then chose my words carefully. "Sometimes," I said, "people my age are given things without knowing exactly what they are. Supplements, sleep aids, things like that." Her eyes sharpened, not suspicious, just professional. "Is someone giving you medication?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's the problem." She didn't press. She didn't panic. She simply nodded. "If you ever want to talk," she said, "my door is open." That night, my daughter-in-law brought me soup, homemade, very thoughtful, very warm. "I thought you might be tired," she said, setting the bowl down in front of me. "You've been doing so much lately." I smiled. "That's kind of you." She watched me take the first spoonful. Just one. My eyelids felt heavy within minutes. Not asleep, just slower, like my thoughts were moving through thick air. I excused myself early and went to bed. But I didn't sleep. I lay there, heart steady, mind alert, counting the seconds it took for the sensation to fade. When it did, I got up, slipped into the kitchen, and poured the rest of the soup down the drain. The next morning, I went to Mrs. Calder's house. I brought the empty container. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look shocked. She tested it. Her face changed. "This isn't accidental," she said quietly. "What is it?" I asked. "A low-dose sedative, mixed carefully, enough to dull awareness, enough to create confusion if used repeatedly. Not enough to kill, enough to control." I thanked her and walked home slowly, letting the truth settle into my bones. My son came home late that evening. He sat across from me at the table, scrolling through his phone. "Mom," he said casually, "have you ever thought about simplifying things? You know, letting us handle some responsibilities?" I looked at him, really looked. The boy I once held against my chest, the man now avoiding my eyes. "I've handled my life just fine," I said. He sighed. "It's not about that, it's about safety." Safety. The word tasted bitter. A few days later, I overheard them whispering in the hallway. "She didn't even notice last night," my daughter-in-law said. "She's still sharp. We have to be careful." Careful. That was when I stopped pretending I didn't know. But I also didn't confront them, because confrontation gives people time to adjust their lies. Instead, I did something else. I paid attention to how they spoke about me to others. At school pickup, my daughter-in-law laughed with another parent. She's sweet, but, aging. At a family gathering, my son joked, "Mom's memory isn't what it used to be." Always said with a smile, always said with concern. And then came the moment that broke something open. My grandson came home with a worksheet. "Write about someone who protects you," it said at the top. He handed it to me proudly. I read his words slowly. "My grandma protects me. She listens. She tells me the truth is important. Mom says some things are secrets, but Grandma says secrets can be dangerous." My hands trembled, not with fear, with certainty. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. They think this is about my mind. It isn't. It's about control. I closed the notebook, and for the first time since that morning in the kitchen, I smiled, not kindly, strategically, because they believed they were guiding the story. They had no idea. They were about to walk themselves straight into the ending. I didn't change my behavior. That's what confused them. I didn't accuse, I didn't cry, I didn't suddenly become fragile or dramatic. I stayed exactly the same. And when people don't behave the way you expect, you start filling the silence with your own mistakes. A week after I read my grandson's essay, I mentioned, casually over breakfast, that I'd started volunteering twice a week at the local senior community center. My daughter-in-law looked up sharply. "Volunteering?" "Yes," I said, spreading jam on my toast. "They needed help organizing donations. I like being useful." She laughed, a little too fast. "That's wonderful. Good for you." My son nodded. "Keeps you active." Active. At the center, I met people who didn't speak around me. A social worker named Denise, who asked questions and waited for answers. A counselor who specialized in family care dynamics. A retired pediatric psychologist who volunteered her time and listened more than she spoke. I didn't tell them my story, not directly. I told stories about women I'd known, about families who meant well, about how care could sometimes cross invisible lines. They didn't interrupt. They didn't rush me. They asked thoughtful questions, and they remembered my answers. At home, my daughter-in-law grew more attentive. "Did you eat today? Did you take your vitamins? Do you remember our conversation yesterday?" Always framed as concern, always delivered like proof. I responded kindly, honestly, "Yes, yes, yes." It unsettled her. One evening, she suggested something that made my heart go very still. "Maybe," she said, "we should have a family wellness meeting, just to make sure everyone's on the same page." I looked at my son. He hesitated, then nodded. "That might be a good idea." I smiled. "I think that's a lovely suggestion." They thought this was their moment, They had no idea it was mine. The meeting was scheduled at the community center, neutral ground, my daughter-in-law insisted. She invited a doctor she'd already spoken to, a counselor, a social worker. Professional, responsible, documented. I arrived early, holding my grandson's hand. The counselor greeted us warmly. Denise smiled when she saw me. The pediatric psychologist, Dr. Harris, sat quietly at the table, reviewing notes. My daughter-in-law entered confidently, her hand resting possessively on my son's arm. She began speaking first. "She's been forgetting things," she said gently. "Small things, names, appointments. We just want to make sure she's safe." The doctor nodded. Understandable. The counselor turned to me. "How do you feel about that?" "I feel listened to most days." That wasn't what they expected. Dr. Harris looked up. "You live with your grandmother?" she asked my grandson. He nodded. "And how do you feel about that?" He shrugged. "I like it. She tells me stories." "Does she ever forget who you are?" the doctor asked. "No," my grandson said quickly. "She remembers everything." My daughter-in-law smiled tightly. The counselor asked, "Are there any concerns about care routines, medications, meals?" My daughter-in-law answered before I could. "I handle most of that." Dr. Harris leaned forward. "Does Ruth take prescribed medication?" "No," my daughter-in-law said, "just supplements." "What kind?" the doctor asked. She paused. "Natural ones," she replied, "for sleep, stress." "Who administers them?" Denise asked. "Well, I do," she said. "She trusts me." The room grew quiet. I spoke then, calmly. "I've been meaning to ask," I said, "is it normal for supplements to make time feel fuzzy?" My son frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, sometimes people experience heaviness, slowness, not confusion, just delay." Dr. Harris nodded slowly. "That can happen with certain sedatives." My daughter-in-law's jaw tightened. "They're safe," she said quickly. "Low dose." "How low?" the doctor asked. She didn't answer. The counselor turned to my grandson. "You wrote something very interesting in your school assignment." He looked at me. I nodded. "She tells me not to lie, but Mama says some things are secrets." "What kind of secrets?" Denise asked gently. He hesitated, then said, "Things you put in drinks." The silence that followed was heavy. My son stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous." Dr. Harris didn't raise her voice. "Children don't invent patterns, they repeat them." The doctor turned to me. "May I ask, have you ever been evaluated independently?" "Yes," I said, "last month." I handed over the report. Clean, clear, detailed. No cognitive decline, no impairment. My daughter-in-law's face drained of color. "This meeting," she said, forcing a laugh, "was supposed to help." "It is," Denise replied, "just not in the way you expected." I looked at my son then, not angrily, not accusingly, just honestly. "You could have talked to me. You chose something else." He didn't answer. The counselor closed her folder. "There will need to be follow-up." My daughter-in-law whispered, "This isn't fair." I stood, taking my grandson's hand. "Fair," I said softly, "is when everyone finally tells the truth." As we walked out, I felt no triumph, only relief. Because the room had done what rooms like that always do. It didn't punish, it revealed. And once something is revealed, it can never be hidden again. Consequences don't arrive with sirens. They arrive with letters, with phone calls, with quiet shifts in who stands where when a room fills up. In the days after the meeting, the house felt different, not tense, emptier, like the walls themselves had stepped back to watch. My daughter-in-law stopped offering to make me anything at all. No coffee, no soup, no gentle questions. She avoided my eyes. When she did look at me, it was with something close to disbelief, as if I had changed shape when she wasn't watching. My son tried to pretend nothing had happened. He talked about work, about traffic, about weather, but silence followed him like a shadow. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, a formal request for review from Adult Protective Services. Neutral language, no accusations, just procedure. My daughter-in-law cried when she read it. Not loudly, not convincingly. "I was just trying to help," she said to my son, her voice breaking at the edges. He didn't answer. The second letter arrived 3 days later from the school counselor, a routine follow-up after a child mentioned secrets involving adult behavior. Routine, they called it. Nothing felt routine after that. A social worker came to the house. She spoke to all of us separately. She asked careful questions and waited through uncomfortable pauses. She spoke to my grandson last, sitting cross-legged on the floor with crayons between them. When she left, she shook my hand. "You handled yourself well," she said. "I didn't do much," I replied. She smiled. "Exactly." The doctor from the wellness meeting called me personally. "I want to be very clear," she said. "Your evaluations show no impairment, none. Any medication administered without consent is a serious violation." I thanked her and hung up. That evening, my son finally sat across from me at the kitchen table. No phone, no excuses. "I didn't know how to stop it," he said. I looked at the wood grain beneath my hands. "You could have spoken." He rubbed his face. "She said you wouldn't understand, that you'd panic." "And you believed her." He nodded. "That was your choice," I said quietly. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Some apologies arrived too late to land. 2 weeks later, my daughter-in-law was formally charged. Not dramatically, not publicly, just a careful, undeniable record of decisions made over time. She moved out that night. My grandson cried when he saw her packing. I knelt beside him and held his face in my hands. "Sometimes," I told him, "people we love make very wrong choices." "Is it my fault?" he asked. "No," I said firmly. "It's because you told the truth." He nodded, as if storing that somewhere important. The custody process was long, painful, necessary. My son attended every session, spoke little, listened more. I was asked if I wanted to pursue full guardianship. I said no. I want stability, not replacement. The court granted shared custody with strict conditions. And just like that, the future rearranged itself. Months passed. The house filled again, not with noise, but with rhythm. Mornings were slower, evenings calmer. My grandson did his homework at the same table where the coffee cup once waited. Sometimes he looked at me and smiled for no reason. That was enough. One afternoon, as we walked home from school, he asked, "Grandma, were you scared?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I was awake." He considered that. "I think that's better." So did I. On a clear autumn morning, I returned to the community center, not as a volunteer, but as a speaker. They asked me to talk about aging, autonomy, and trust. I didn't tell my whole story. I didn't need to. I spoke about listening, about asking questions, about how concern becomes control when it forgets consent. Afterward, a woman my age took my hand. "They think getting older makes us smaller," she said. I smiled. "It just makes us more precise." That night, I opened my notebook one last time. I wrote, "They thought my life was winding down. They were wrong. It was clarifying. I closed it and placed it back in the drawer. Some stories don't need to be revisited. They need to be finished. As for me, I sit by the window most evenings now, watching the tree my husband planted sway in the wind. My grandson reads beside me. My son cooks dinner. Careful, quiet, learning. We are not a perfect family. We are an honest one. And that, I've learned, is stronger than anything they tried to take from me. If you've ever felt controlled by family, this story is for you. Truth louder than silence. Like, share, and subscribe.